The first slab of ice took the bow off Argo 3 and turned it into glitter. On the command deck of the USV Harriet Tubman, Commodore Maya Rourke watched the feed flatten into static and said, very calmly, "We're not dying that way." The Kestrel Gate was a blind throat of stone and superconducting coils, and the Virith Covenant had sown it with cold mass mines. To push through, she'd need a trick old enough to be human. The Tubman rode her radiator fins close to the amber light of Kestrel's dwarf star, heat blooming like a halo. Every screen was sleeting data, mine wakes, scattering angles, the pulse of 1,000 small engines in convoy. Civilian hulls stretched behind them in a ragged ribbon, farm cylinders, school habs, Leith leaf arcs trailing photosynthetic veils. People had packed their lives into these hulls the way their great-grandparents once packed cars for a midnight move across state lines. Quiet, fast, hoping the trouble slept until morning. "Switch to ChurchNet," Rourke said. Her comms officer didn't ask why. In another century, church basements had been logistics hubs for marches the law tried to silence. The organizers used simple, resilient networks that couldn't be jammed because they were culture, not antennas. Fleet Doctrine had borrowed the idea and named it in homage. Short burst, narrow beam, peer-to-peer, hopping along a web of prearranged habits. Blink codes on navigation lights, helmet cams tapping haptic rhythms, manual shutters on laser comms pulsing like steeple bells. The mines were clever, ice-wrapped tungsten that read like comet grit until a warm hull kissed their wake. Rourke's human trick was pettier and therefore perfect. She ordered the convoy to dump wastewater in staggered curtains. The sudden cold plumes pulled the mines into premature ignition like overanxious fireworks. The nearest ring of the gate flashed crystalline white and then cleared in an expanding sphere of harmless vapor. "Window open," said Lieutenant CO. 3 minutes before the next cascade. "Tin Angel," Rourke said. The plan was scrappy. Hide destroyers under the thermal shadow of ore barges and push them like shopping carts until the last second. The Virith targeted heat, habit, pattern. Humans hid in the exceptions. Under her glove, the deck vibrated with the Tubman's reactor's shifting load, a felt language drilled into every spacer. The beat today said urgency, but not panic. Sparrow squadrons launched, their wedge silhouettes unfolding into bright kites against the gate's throat. The Leith liaison, Ambassador Cyril, long neck swaying, leaves along their spine trembling, watched with eyes like pawns. "You risk much for your kin," Cyril said softly. "We're not all kin," Rourke said, "and then because the truth mattered, we choose to be. The difference changes everything." It was a statement of doctrine as much as of ethics. Virtue ethics, her academy professor would have said. Become what you practice. They practiced showing up for one another under fire. The first Virith pickets slid into view, bone-white hulls carved with austere script, sensor masts like prayer flags, engines whispering cold. They fired passing shots, testing, then bracketed the convoy with a neat geometry that promised inevitability. Rourke thought of Midway, fragile planes diving on decks stacked with fuel hoses and bombs, a war swung by timing and audacity. If timing was everything, then she would make time misbehave. "Now," she said. The ore barges kicked thrusters, pivoted, and the destroyers peeled out from their shadows like wolves slipping from brush. Lasers stitched and rail slugs ticked like hail. 3 mines sparked prematurely in the lashed-together wake of junk and coolant, opening a seam just wide enough for sparrows to knife point through. The Virith formation flexed, cool and unafraid. That was their strength, a theology of inevitability. They believed mercy was to quicken endings. Rourke believed mercy was to complicate them. A new contact throbbed on the scope with the gravity of a confession. The screen relabeled it in stark font: Sanctifier Axiom, Enemy Supercarrier, Ritual Ship and Factory of Precision Death. It slid from the gate like a verdict, thousands of bays unfolding, a cathedral built to erase debate. Options? Rourke asked. Conventional ones. CO said. None. Good, Rourke said and smiled without humor. We're bad at conventional anyway. They did not pick the ground of this battle, but they chose the reason. The convoy had to pass, everything else was accidentals. The axiom hailed in that serene tonality all their translators hated. Release the non-combatants, it intoned, and be absolved. Another people might have found comfort in surrender dressed as sacrament. Humans had a different liturgy, stubborn hope. Rourke moved the tubman out of the safe line and into the fire path. Bring us to a screen, she said. The shield calculus felt like triage. Every megajoule spent catching a kill beam was one not spent accelerating a lifeboat. Just war theory called it proportionality. You did not commit more harm than needed to avert it. In space, proportionality lived in power budgets and tankage and the cruel arithmetic of range. Sanctifier launching flocks, CO said. Long, bright spears fell from the axiom's underbelly and fanned into hundreds of smaller glints, autonomous darts, each with a single-minded hunger. Rourke thought of schoolchildren practicing tornado drills, small bodies curling under desks the way wire curls under a magnet. Everyone learned what their world taught was inevitable. Leadership was teaching something else. Broadcast humanitarian corridor parameters again, Rourke said. Keep them honest. The Virith recognized corridors as a ritual inconvenience. They would deviate when certainty demanded. Still, the act mattered. When this campaign was taught, she wanted some future cadet to recognize that humanity kept the rules when it hurt. On the net, the Leith Leafarks sang coordinates in their 8-tone language, and Kestran scouts, slim avians with transparent wing membranes, spiraled above the convoy with thrumming sails. Dunkirk calculus, Rourke murmured. You break a big escape into 1,000 small ones. You ask little boats to carry dreams bigger than their hulls. Ma'am, the axiom is seeding the nebula, CO said. Dumping deuterium pellets into the photonic mantle, they're going to light the whole passage. Ignite the fog, turn the corridor into a stovepipe. It would cook the convoy in minutes. Rourke swallowed, her mouth tasted like old pennies. We have to make them wait, she said. Give me decoys. They didn't have elegant drones to spare. They had tarp haulers and plumbing skiffs. Paint them bright, Rourke ordered. Big heat flares, sharp signatures, make 100 fake us. On another day, deception could have been crime. Today, it was survival without perfidy, no false flags, no betrayals of sacred signs. Just noise. Cyril leaned in, leaf veins darkening. I will broadcast our kinship oath to the covenant, they said. They consider us weeds. We will remind them weeds are persistent. The convoy obeyed in that frantic, practiced way people do when the bag is already packed by the door. Skiffs looped to become ghosts. Sparrow pilots called their fuel like confessions. Somewhere in the middle of the ribbon, a school habitat reported a baby born near the water tanks. Rourke let herself smile, 1 second, then gone. Hope was not a plan, but it was a password into the plans that mattered. The Virith darts found the decoys and flocked, exquisite in their mistake. Tubman's destroyers lunged and swatted them down in overlapping cones of laser light. The ChurchNet bloomed with small victories, cleaned 12, saved 4, Sparrow 2 limping. But limping is living. In the corner of her vision, the nebula brightened as the Axiom's deuterium clouds reached ignition density. Rourke felt time narrow. "They are going to light it," CO said. "Only if we let them," Rourke said, and shifted the Tubman's posture by a fractional angle that would make no sense to any AI that hadn't grown up reading human shrug. "We're going to make a mess of their timing. Ma'am, get ready to dance." She didn't mean elegance. She meant stamp your foot on the offbeat hard enough to make the floorboards complain. The first spark flickered in the fog, a match lifted to a rain-soaked field. The convoy surged forward into the narrowing throat, dragging their own weather behind them. Rourke's eyes stung, though there was nothing in the air. "On my mark," she said. "We teach inevitability to wait." The countdown reached 3 when the Axiom changed its mind. Instead of fire, the Axiom sent faith. A lattice bloomed across the corridor, sensor nets with a predictive core the Virith called the Shepherd, an AI that folded probability the way a hand folds paper cranes. It read where you wanted to be and arrived first. "Jamming is total on conventional bands," CO said. "ChurchNet is holding, but thin." "Then we thicken it," Rourke said. On an empty channel, she hummed 3 notes, the bones of a lullaby. "Patch me into hull vibra," she said, and felt the Tubman answer under her boots. The pattern that followed wasn't a code in any brittle sense. It was a tempo language, ship metal knocking rhythms like a street musician on a bucket, short, long, short that meant pivot, long, long, short that meant break, a grammar old as work songs. It lived in the crew, not the uplinks, and you couldn't jam people who already carried the beat. Her XO blinked. "We're going folk. We're going human," Rourke said. She remembered lessons about the Navajo code talkers, how their living language had baffled machine and mathematician. "You didn't copy that. You honored the principle. Build your communication in the living, not the machine." Ghost Tide deployed. Millions of pinhead sails unfurling from cargo holds, silver confetti catching star wind and reactor wash. The sails flashed deliberate lies, ricocheting pings until Shepard's clean certainty filled with echoes. On the tactical screen, the Virith formation hesitated. Not fear, not exactly, but the unfamiliar itch of doubt. "Strike packets ready," CO said. Tubman's Sparrows and Leith skiffs had been waiting for this sliver of ambiguity. Like midway pilots diving onto decks stacked with ordnance, they plunged along the vectors Shepard had thought too low probability to guard. Rail-driven flechettes stitched holes across a sanctifier escort. 2 bays on a sub-carrier blossomed, ammunition cooking off in brief suns. For 8 heartbeats the battle smelled like victory. Then Shepard learned. The lattice flexed away from the ghosts and began to read the rhythm in Tubman's floors. Predictive lines recoalesced like frost. A cold lance licked across space and erased Sparrow 6 with surgical disinterest. The cheer died in Rourke's throat. "New contact, relativistic spear," CO said. The icon was a needle dragging a scar across the screen. A Virith coil had spat a tungsten rod in their precise direction. It would not burn bright. It would simply arrive, and the arriving would be a verdict. Rourke felt the crew's eyes on the back of her neck, that collective sense that leaders must carry not just plan but meaning. "Proportionality," she said aloud, to remind herself as much as anyone. "We intercept if we can, we move if we must, we do not make someone else pay our bill." "Time to impact, 50 seconds, CO said. "Bring up the forward plates," Rourke said, and then, Because desperation is the mother of invention and invention has a junk drawer, she said. What's in the museum bay? The Tubman, like many capital ships, carried relics: a scale gun deck from a Sail Age frigate, a wedge of Cold War carrier deck with faded paint lines, a coilgun barrel retired for hairline fractures. The fleet kept them to teach cadets history you could touch. Old barrel, said Chief Engineer Tuezen. Retired Mark 12 coil from the John Lewis. Is it still a coil? Rourke asked. Tuezen's grin arrived like sunrise over a broken city. It could be. They could not outrun the spear. They could not catch it with plates without showering the convoy with their death. There was, however, a gas giant past the gate whose magnetic field could drink energy if given the right straw. Mount the coil on the bow, Rourke said. We'll nudge. You cannot be serious, CO said. Midway wasn't a sure thing either, Rourke said. Neither was crossing a bridge in Selma without knowing if the other side would meet you with batons or with bread. Do it. The deck shuddered as cranes swung and clamps bit. The air tasted like copper again. The spear kept coming, a chalk line stretched across all their children's tomorrows. A line coil, Tuezen said. Ready to bend. Bend it, Rourke said. The world lurched. The retired Mark 12 coughed one more useful breath and spat a tailored magnetic field into the spear's path. At relativistic speed, nudge meant a hair of angle, enough if the universe was feeling generous. The tungsten sliver kissed the field, sang one note none of them could hear, and curved by a handful of ship lengths. It tore an ugly groove across Tubman's bow plating, shearing antennae and dignity, then arrowed on toward the gas giant's swollen magnetosphere. The planet swallowed it like a stone into a deep lake. A minute later, an aurora bloomed in silent ribbons across the giant's night. On the net, a cheer punched a hole through fear. Tuezen whooped like someone who'd won a state fair pie contest by accident. Rourke let herself have 2 seconds of grin and then stuffed it away because the axiom still hung in the corridor like a graven certainty. Status, she asked. Forward arrays gone, CO said. Maneuvering green. Convoy at 78% past the gate. The axiom is adjusting. It is not used to being defied. Few bullies are, Rourke said. Ready the John Lewis. The what? Her hull's still in memorial orbit, Rourke said. We brought the coil. We can wake the rest. The USV John Lewis had served as a peacekeeper and convoy escort before the fleet retired her to a slow ring above Kestrel as a classroom. Now Rourke pinged her quiescent systems with a password most officers didn't know, because most officers didn't spend off hours reading restoration manuals. Are we seriously about to commandeer a museum? CO asked. I prefer invite history to the party, Rourke said. On the external feeds, tug drones peeled away from convoy duty and arrowed toward a dark hulk with white lettering along its flank. John Lewis, good trouble. Service lights flickered down her spine like an old man remembering how to dance. Rourke opened a circuit to the convoy. This is Maya Rourke, she said. If you have engines, if you have a tug, if you have a winch and half a notion, we need you. This is a Dunkirk run. We are getting everyone through. Responses tumbled in. Kestron sailboats offering lift in sheer winds of plasma. Leith Leafarks pushing photosynthetic panels to maximum to spare reactor output. Human plumbers in grease-smudged suits swearing beautifully as they repurposed pipe arrays into heat shunts. Found family is the family you find when the barn's already on fire and you still pass pails. Between orders, Rourke stole a glance at a live window into the Tubman's mess. Crew clustered around a table sticky with old coffee rings. Ensign Alvarez, 21, scared bright, was sketching the battle on a napkin for a Leith tech with trembling leaf hands. Cyril stood at the door, head bowed like someone catching a hymn. Humanity's coalition was not clean, it was beautiful. "Ma'am," CO said, "the Axiom is trawling with tractor fields. They've caught 3 laggards. They are bringing them in." Virith doctrine spoke of absolution. Boarding meant quiet ends. Rourke's stomach clenched. "We don't fire on our own," she said, "because some lines were bright. Deal them back." "How?" CO asked. Rourke pointed at the Sanctifier's open bays, vast black mouths rimmed with engraved scripture. "Their ritual requires a door held open," she said. "They broadcast a mercy code to authenticate the taking. We answer with an echo. Not a false flag, not a crime against the signs that protected the helpless, just a misdirection within the enemy's own language." "Can we mimic the code?" Tuazin asked. "We don't mimic, we respond," Rourke said. "Their mercy handshake has a recipient-ready ping. We captured one of their drones intact last month at Tharsis Verge. Its beacon is in the locker." CO's eyebrows climbed. "You kept a trophy." "I kept a tool," Rourke said. "Mount the beacon on a sail mine. Dress it in the right reflection and thermal paint. Let them open the door for their own undoing." The Tubman's small craft hatch erized, and a glittering seed drifted into battle, a sail like a bright petal, a Virith beacon at its heart. On the Sanctifier's flank, embossed scripture flickered and bay doors dilated wider in anticipatory grace. "Signal received," CO whispered. "They think they are saving us." "Let them believe in their own story," Rourke said, voice very soft. "Then we'll finish ours." The sail mine floated into shadow, then bloomed, petals unfurling. A flower of razor-thin foils seeded with shaped charges and chaff. The bay door began to close as if the Sanctifier suddenly felt a draft where none should be. "Time to detonation," Rourke asked. 8 seconds. "Stand by to run the gap when it pops," Rourke said. "All ships, we go fishing in a cathedral." The countdown ticked. Somewhere deep in the Tubman's bones, the old coil hummed one more quiet note. Across the way, the Sanctifier's mouth was opening, closing, opening, caught between ritual and suspicion. The gap narrowed to a knife's edge as the sail flower reached full bloom, and the lights on the Axiom's lip turned from white to warning red. The Axiom's bay lights went red and the petals popped anyway. Not the perfect detonation Tuazin had modeled. Half the charges went early when the warning interlock spiked, but enough. The Sanctifier's mouth convulsed. Engraved scripture tore, ribs buckled, and a pressure wave rolled out, hot and glittering with foil shards. For one beat the cathedral flinched. "Gap," CO barked. "Fishing time," Rourke said. "Sparrows, tugs, Leith skiffs inside the mouth. Grab our people and go. No guns inside the red line. This is a rescue, not a vendetta." Tubman shoved forward until her shadow fell across the wounded bay. Tractor threads winked on, blue-white ropes that sang against the Sanctifier's pale hull. The 3 captured stragglers, an orchard drum with pears still dangling in microgravity, a Kestrin sail barge, and an old human med scow painted with a hand-brushed red cross, hung in the enemy's field like flies in amber. Their hull lights blinked church-net rhythms back at Tubman. "We're alive, we're waiting, we're afraid." Cyril spread their leaf hands over the comm board. "We will seed confusion," they said. Leith drones shook spores from their petal arrays, micromirror dust that made the shepherd see phantom edges everywhere. The lattice twitched, second-guessing itself. Doubt was a wedge and humanity had learned to hammer. "John Lewis reports nominal," CO said. incredulous and delighted at once. On an external feed, the museum ship's letters were a benediction. Good trouble. She came in slow, dignified, with tug drones walking her like big dogs. Her antique coils coughed awake and laid a gentle pull on the med scow. Old bones remembered their job. Inside the Sanctifier's bay, the world became a narrow theater. Sparrows folded their wings to knife through the closing geometry. Two pilots clipped capture clamps and kicked free a heartbeat before the doors tried to scissor their tails off. One out. A pilot gasped. Kestrin barge clear. The orchard drum was trickier. Its moorings were new, fused by Virith mercy machines meant to hold while priests intoned the theology of endings. Ensign Alvarez rode a plumbing skiff in under the door with a coil-cutting torch, cheeks pale, jaw set. An overlay showed her heart rate spiking and then settling into a drummer's beat. "I've got you," Alvarez said on an open loop to the trees as much as the people inside. "We don't let orchards die." 30 seconds, CO warned. The bay lips battered had found their resolve. The doors began to close for real, hydraulics hot with zeal. "Make us wider," Rourke said. "Put the tubman's nose in the jam." No one argued. The tubman angled in until her scarred bow kissed engraved scripture and pushed. The deck under Rourke's feet thrummed in a register that meant, "This is stupid and good and hurts." Tuazin rode the power like a rodeo champion. "Don't sneeze," they said through clenched teeth. "If we sneeze, we leave our front teeth in their hymn book." Alvarez carved the last mooring and kicked. The orchard drum lurched loose, pears tumbling in a glittering rain inside its transparent band. A tug caught it on the second try. "Two out," CO said, voice thin with relief. "Where's the scow?" The med scow had a broken thruster and a stubborn streak. The Sanctifier's tractors reeled it in even as the John Lewis pulled the other way. The old ship's coils glowed a sullen red. Metal sang and paint flaked and long unused welds remembered why they were there. "Come on, Congressman," Tuazin whispered to the ancient hull. "One more march." "Door closing," CO said. Red lines converged like the last pages of a book you don't want to end. Rourke looked at the scope, at the convoy ribbon, at the giant's aurora still ghosting from the spear they'd bent. Just war theory whispered proportionality. Don't break what you're here to save. Virtue ethics whispered become what you practice. Today they practice staying. "Hold," Rourke said. Tubman's bow groaned. The door scraped along her plates and peeled them like a tin of sardines. Sparks sprayed into vacuum brief stars. "Hold," she said again, and Alvarez yelled, "Clear." At the same instant the med scow's clamp slipped free and John Lewis fell back, hauling her like a rowboat dragging a whale. "Back us out," Rourke said. "We can't," CO said. "Their tractors shifted. They're trying to keep us. They want us inside." For one nauseous second the plan inverted. Cathedral becomes trap, rescuer becomes relic. The Axiom's dorsal fins were changing posture to bring main batteries to bear. Shepard reknit its nets around Tubman's silhouette like a funeral shroud drawn neat. Rourke felt the vector lines converge on her ship and thought, if we cut and run, the door will guillotine a dozen friendlies. If we stay, we die and everyone learns that mercy is foolish. She exhaled and made the choice that would cost. "All hands," she said, "we're burning into the bay. We're going to board a supercarrier with a fleet tender and a museum ship, and then we're going to walk back out." Nothing in any manual covered this. The tubman slid inside the Sanctifier's mouth like a salmon shouldering upriver through a dam spillway. Churchnet rhythms thumped under boots and along bulkheads, short long for brace, long short for cut, an old work song pulling a new weight. The deck lights went to low red. Rourke tasted iron and old coffee ghosting the air. Virith servitors scuttled along gantries, elegant and unalarmed. The Covenant believed in inevitability. A trespasser inside the shrine must only be a prelude to a tidy end. That belief created gaps. Humans were gaps with engines. Boarding parties to the scow, the orchard, and the barge, Rourke said. Do not harm those who do not harm. If they point tools at you, disarm the tools. If they point their eyes at you, tell them your name. Alvarez landed her skiff hard against the scow's hatch and yanked on manual releases until her gloves squealed. A Virith priest stood within, bone pale and calm, a hand extended in an unmistakable gesture. Alvarez hesitated, then took it. The priest bowed and stepped aside. We recognize your claim, a translator whispered. We contest your haste. Welcome to our hurry, Alvarez said, and tugged a floating medic through the hatch by the elbow. The priest watched, a note of curiosity in their stillness, as if studying a rare weather. Up on Tubman's bridge, Cyril's leaves darkened in effort as they sang a kinship hymn on open calm. It wasn't a lie. It was a reminder that life had other arrangements than inevitability. Kestrin pilots spiraled in the bay, flicking transparent wings to redirect floodlights into spears of glare that made Shepard's optics squint. John Lewis danced closer than any sane restoration crew would allow, her good trouble letters scuffed by flying debris, old coils throwing staticky halos. Sanctifier charging, CO warned. They're going to light the deuterium anyway. The axiom is, ma'am, they're going to cook themselves to kill us. Then we change the recipe, Rourke said. Her finger hovered over a control her instructors would have marked last resort in red and underlined twice. She flicked it. Tuazin, can we reverse the coil's polarity and dump a shaped pulse into their ignition bloom? Tuazin's laugh sounded like a cough and a prayer having a fist fight. We can if you're okay with no eyebrows and an angry maintenance log. Anger is survivable, Rourke said. Cook me a pulse that sings in their alloy. This is foolishness, the Leith liaison murmured, fond and terrified, and therefore human. Rourke glanced at the crew. CO's hands were steady, eyes too bright. Alvarez's vitals bobbed in a window, steadying to a drummer's roll. In the mess, the child born by the water tanks slept under a thermal blanket printed with cartoon clouds. Found family was not a metaphor. It was countable, nameable, savable. Pulse in 3, Tuazin said. Make it a parquet step, Rourke said, the rye leaking out despite herself. Left, right, left. The reversed coil belched a bass note through the hull. The pulse slammed into the deuterium haze the sanctifier meant to turn into a stovepipe. For a breath, the bloom hesitated, confused grains of fuel trying to become flame and being asked instead to remember dance. Plasma flared in curls instead of a sheet. Shepard's prediction field, usually crisp as a chalk line, fuzzed like damp paper. Go now, Rourke snapped. Everybody out. Alvarez shoved the last stretcher into a sparrow and slapped the pilot's shoulder. Kestrin wings beat a drum roll of light. Cyril's drones threw a last cloud of mirror dust. John Lewis yanked the med scow hard enough to pop something important, and every warning in her ancient boards lit up like Christmas. The sanctifier fired anyway. The bloom took, ragged but hungry, and rolled across the bay's mouth. It wanted to be a throat of flame. The pulse had only taught it to sing. That song still killed. Tubman bowed her head and took the first bite on her shields. Paint boiled, plates hissed, and a mural of Aurora crawled across her port side like scripture rewritten by weather. A beam lanced from the Axiom's spine and found John Lewis's flank, carving away, plating down to the old ship's ribs. "Good trouble holding," Co whispered, astonished. "Get them clear," Rourke said, and then the universe tugged at her sleeve. The shepherd had stopped guessing. It had learned the ChurchNet's tempos and started to count ahead, arriving at Tubman's moves as if it had been born in her hull. "Ma'am," Co said, voice small, "it knows us." Rourke closed her eyes for a single, impertinent heartbeat. Stoic phrases rose and fell, control what you can, accept what you cannot, and she thought of the Navajo code talkers again, of living language as shield. Living meant changing. "Change the beat," she said, and stamped her heel on the deck. The new rhythm wasn't a march anymore. It was jazz, skip beat, ghost notes, syncopations that only made sense if you were there, if you had been there when a grandmother taught you to clap off the beat at cookouts because it made the song taste like pepper. Tubman answered. Her crew answered. The whole unruly convoy answered, Leith leaves shivering on off beats, Kestrin wings flickering Morse riffs, tug pilots thumping bulkheads with wrenches. Shepherd, calibrated to squares and scales, reached for the next neat bar and found a spill of blue notes instead. "Window," Co breathed. "Everybody out," Rourke said again, softer and fiercer than before. They ran. Not in panic, not in rout, Dunkirk style, breaking the big escape into 1,000 small ones, each with a name. The orchard drum's pairs swung like tiny, ridiculous planets behind its clear band as it rode a tug's tractor. The med scow bled heat and gratitude. John Lewis limped with good manners, turning to put her thicker flank between the leaf forks and the sanctifier's next thought. The Axiom adapted with chilling grace. Its dorsal spines flexed to reshape the corridor, tractors gaffing the bloom into a tidal bore. If Shepherd couldn't predict the dancers, it would move the dance floor. "Sanctifier is preparing a spinal lance," Co said. "Power climbing. They are going to spear us and pin us to the gate." Rourke had seen maps of disaster zones where a river was turned to save a town. If you can't stop the water, you dig a new bed. "We don't block the fire," she said. "We channel it." "Into what?" Tuazin demanded. "We're not a fire department with infinite hydrants." "Into them," Rourke said, and held up a palm before anyone argued. "Not to kill, just to make them busy saving themselves." The plan was ugly and made of leftovers. Leith Leafark's unfurled emergency agricultural sails, thin, bright films meant to catch sun to feed crops. Kestrin pilots wove those into a lattice with their wing membranes, turning the convoy's rag rugs into a riverbed of light. John Lewis parked broadside and offered what remained of her coils and broken ribs as anchor points. Tubman took the front like the prow of an improvised canoe. "History teaches," Rourke said to the open channel, because someone would be recording, because some cadet would one day need permission. Midway was timing. Dunkirk was boats. The Berlin airlift was pallets and stubbornness. "We're going to add sails to that list." Tuazin's voice came back ragged but game. "Shaping field in 3. This is going to look so illegal in a manual." "It's legal in a soul," Rourke said. "Proportional, discriminate, and aimed at ending harm. Do it." The bloom rolled. The makeshift lattice caught it like a gloved hand catching a curveball, flexing instead of trying to be stone. Heat crawled along sail veins and sang in coiled teeth. Leith leaves browned at the edges and shed in glitter, replaced by fresher growth from deeper in their arcs. Kestrel wings thrummed with effort until their pilots shook with micro-tremors. Tubman bowed and shouldered and turned the current. On the Sanctifier's flank, auxiliary bays slammed shut in a panic that read almost human. Scripture dimmed. The spinal lance's gain stuttered as emergency routing cannibalized its feed. Rourke let herself feel a thin joy at strategy doing what bullets couldn't. "Open channel," she said. CO nodded, reluctant and convinced by turns. "This is Commodore Maya Rourke of the USV Harriet Tubman," she said on every band she had. "We have civilians in this corridor. We are escorting them out. We invite you to cease fire. We will honor a humanitarian corridor for your wounded if you withdraw." Silence answered, then a rustle, then, shockingly, the crisp chime of the Axiom's commander. "Your terms are incoherent. You do not prevail." "We don't need to prevail," Rourke said. "We need them safe." She let the pronoun fall wide. Humans, Leith, Kestrin, even Virith techs blinking in smoky bays. "That's a kind of victory you haven't rehearsed." A Sanctifier escort slid across the line and hoisted a med-pennant Rourke's machines translated as minor succor. Two more followed, hesitant. Someone on the other side wanted a world with rules. That was enough to wedge a door. Then Shepard's patience ended. Probability lines snapped taut. The Axiom's spinal lance burned from coal to star. It reared like an executioner who had waited too long for the drum roll to stop. "Beam forming," CO said, eyes wide. "It's going to sight on us." "On me," Rourke said, and she was not surprised. "Move the leader and you move the lines behind them. Every bully knows this. Every marcher knows it too." Phase Scrambler, Tuazin asked. "We don't have one," CO said. "We do," Rourke said quietly and laid a hand on the old Mark 12 status panel. "Two coils, two museums, one song. We can roughen their coherence if we sing ugly enough." "How ugly?" Tuazin asked, thrilled and appalled. "Like a middle school recorder concert in a tin barn," Rourke said. "Ma'am," CO said, half a laugh and half a sob, "that's a war crime." "Not if it saves everyone's ears," Rourke said. "Get ready. When that lance rises, we're going to detune their choir." The beam brightened, gathering itself like breath before a shout. Rourke could feel the crew looking to her to mean something, to make the moment carry more than terror. She thought of Selma, of crossing a bridge with no guarantee. She thought of Marcus Aurelius. What stands in the way becomes the way. She thought of tubers sprouting in a dark pantry because life is impolite that way. "On my mark," she said. The Axiom exhaled and the universe drew a bright line between before and after. The spinal lance stabbed at Tubman with a whiteness that made cameras cry. Plates screamed. The makeshift river of sails shuddered. The convoy prayed in 1,000 languages, some of them with words, some with hands, some with leaf veins turning like pages. "Now," Rourke said. John Lewis coughed her last noble watt through scarred coils. Tubman answered in antiphon, the retired Mark 12 howling a blue, off-key counterpoint. Between them, the phase of space in front of the Axiom shook like a puddle under a heavy truck. Coherence went woolly. The lance frayed into ribbons, bright gossamer that tore at Tubman's shields instead of spearheading through her heart. "Hold the ugliness," Tuazin grunted. "If we drop pretty, we die." Kestrin pilots added their own marring to the song, fluttering wings in stuttering patterns that made Shepard's synthesizers cough. Leith arcs vibrated their leaf frames on harmonics not in any manual. The ChurchNet didn't just carry orders now, it carried a choir. Not good in any aesthetic sense. Good in the way a hand on your back is good when your knees go. The beam bucked. The Axiom's engines surged to stiffen it, then flinched as the river of shaped plasma, still rolling along the lattice of sails, licked the Sanctifier's capacitors. Emergency shutters cascaded, him text flickering to warning codes. The Axiom tried to open the gate to retreat and found its own bloom poking a finger into its hinge. Convoy 92% clear, CO said, the number catching on his teeth. Keep counting, Rourke said. Numbers are hope with clothes on. An icon on the board winked out. Barrow 2, limping since the first pass, took a splinter of the frayed beam and vanished in a spray of pixels. Rourke closed her eyes, opened them. Name him, she said softly. LT Yi Park, CO said. 28. He loved ugly jazz. Then he would hate what we're doing, Tuazin said, and laughed and then didn't. Sanctifier is listing, CO reported. Axiom is thinking. On the open channel, the commander's voice returned thinner. You should accept absolution. We prefer accountability, Rourke said. Withdraw, we'll keep our corridor, we will not pursue. Silence stretched. Then Virith hulls rotated, precise as prayer wheels, and began to fall back. The shepherd's lattice softened from hard cage to gauze, predictive tendrils retracting like embarrassed hands. The spinal lance guttered to an angry starlet's sulk. Convoy 100%, CO said, voice breaking. We got them. The cheer that shook Tubman wasn't tidy. It was sobs and hoots and leaf rustles and wing thrums and someone pounding the mess table until cups danced. On the John Lewis, ancient relays popped like popcorn and finally went dark. She's dead, Tuazin said, reverent. She died doing the thing she was named for. Section head status, Rourke said around a throat that wanted to close. Reports came in. Hull peeled but whole, heat scars across port, 3 through hull fires out, Alvarez bruised and grinning, a Leith tech missing the tip of a leaf where a door caught it, the baby by the water tank still asleep. Cyril appeared on the bridge, leaf spine trembling. We wrote a new kinship today, they said. We will add your rhythms to our archive. We will tell our seedlings that inevitability can be asked to wait. Rourke nodded an exhausted tilt. And we will teach ours that mercy is work, not mood. She looked at the bay camera one last time. The Sanctifier floated like a wounded certainty, still terrible, now facing choices that weren't all theirs. Signal the Covenant medical penance. Tell them we'll hold the corridor for 1 hour, then we go. Ma'am, CO said, almost shy. The orchard drum wants to send you pears. Tell them to keep them cold and count them twice, Rourke said. We'll trade stories for fruit when we have beds and coffee. The gate's throat expanded on their scopes, coils humming a welcome they had bled to earn. Behind them, Kestrel's dwarf star burned on with the stubborn smallness that keeps a neighborhood alive. Ahead, the ribbon of refugees unspooled toward a world where they might plant orchards and build schools and argue about zoning. Rourke rested her hand on Tubman's console and felt the ship answer in metal, in heat, in a rhythm that would never be predictable again because it was personal now. She keyed the general channel one last time. This is the USV Harriet Tubman, she said, voice steady. We did not win. We did not lose, we kept a promise. On the hull, someone had chalked an impromptu message in grease pencil next to a peeled plate. Good trouble, too. The camera caught it as Tubman turned. Rourke let herself smile, small and real. Take us through, she said. The convoy slid into the gate's blue throat, a line of small boats carrying dreams bigger than their hulls. The last thing they saw of Kestrel was the aurora over the gas giant, still ghosting where the spear had given up and gone to be beautiful. Rourke thought that was about right.